it's important to remember that we know this. We have the answers. And we've done science on how people learn and how to kind of shorten that path to learn.
All right.
Absolutely. Yeah,
So,
cool. Do you know how many partners I've had?
Over 9,000!
It's how incredibly important it would be to get that information out to the general public for free in a podcast like this.
hello and welcome to the third episode of the Kimudo podcast. My name is Udo, and this is Kim.
Hello?
We have a very interesting listener's question today. Is it okay to teach oversimplifications to children when what is being taught is not exactly true? What about cases where it involves something like hard science, where there's a right and wrong answer? Is there an alternative?
Heavy question. Sure, there are social sciences where things are in the gray area, which is what I studied, right? Where things are not one way or another, but there are many angles you can take on a particular topic. But the question is, if it's not a social science but a real science where you are having, the the rigor to go through and try to find what a definitive answer of a right and wrong answer is, then yeah, that's difficult. I would say it depends on the context of children. What kind of age group are we really talking about there? Because I think that if you have a very young child, teaching them a complex thing might not be appropriate. They don't have the cognitive abilities or even prior experience and knowledge to grasp something that difficult. Does that mean that we should then gatekeep that information if a child is then asking? Of course not, I don't think. So you have to give them some kind of an answer. So you give them a simplified one to help them understand the basics of it. I don't think that necessarily is a wrong thing to do, because I don't know how else you would really solve that issue, because the other alternatives are much worse. You cannot not answer the child. You should definitely not lie to them. You should, and maybe that's the point of the listener question, is that, yeah, but then isn't that kind of a lie, I suppose? And again, I don't think so. I would always want to put knowledge in the context of a continuum. It's always knowledge in science is never complete, as we know. It's always going to continue developing. We're always going to find better data and better tools to discern that data, which means we're going to come to different conclusions, and it's going to lead us down different paths. So that means that if we know that learning is on a continuum, we should consider humans to be on the same as well. We should consider that we are never done learning as a human being. We all know that. So teaching children an oversimplification is first step in knowing or learning how a particular kind of complex idea maybe works or something like that. So I think that's fine. It lays kind of a foundation. It lays the groundwork for more detailed learning in the future. Once we understand or accept that we are always learning on a continuum, then we should also understand that we don't have complete knowledge. None of us do anyway. So you're already on there. So having knowledge as a child of, something that maybe is not exactly how something works, then that's fine, because you will learn more about it once you get older. But also if you're interested, but also particularly if you're going to study it as a professional vocation, then you're definitely going to have that fixed. So I don't think there's a problem in it already, because we've already have in our society and systems built that if it turns out that you want to become an engineer or an architect, for example, and you want to design buildings, if you were told that a building is made of only concrete, and then you find out as a designer in the future that, oh no, there's actually lots of materials that go into building a building, of course, you're not gonna get to the stage in life where you're designing a building without coming across that fixing that earlier overly simplification of what a building maybe is, for example.
So I agree with you that simplifications are okay, because like when you learn something, you have to start somewhere, and you can't like overwhelm children or like young students with with I know special, very very rare edge cases or so,
Mhm.
or with too detailed knowledge. So I agree with you. Like starting with simplifications is a good way to teach. But would you say, is it okay for a teacher to lie and say like, yeah, you should not believe this or you should not believe that? Because like there's many people, for example, who don't believe in evolution,
Mhm.
even though there's like a lot of evidence for that. A lot of
Mhm.
people would just say like evolution theory. I mean, it's just a theory. But the thing is like in science, a theory is something different than what we how we use the word theory in our everyday life.
Yeah.
A theory in science is like it's very well proven.
Yeah. Gravity's a theory, as we always point out, right?
Yeah, theory of relativity like it has been there's a lot of evidence and people have tried to disprove it, but like they have failed many times.
Yeah, but also gravity is a theory too, and we use that to build buildings with, fly airplanes with, drive cars with, and walk and design how we run and shoes after that, etc.
And
But
they work.
when they work and they solve the issue, and it seems to be working out well, right? But yeah, but technically, if you want to be technical about it, gravity is a theory, of course.
Yeah, and I think like especially in science, like you have to be careful in the sense of um you have to ask yourself a question: under which conditions does this theory apply?
Yeah.
Because for example, like we have like before Einstein, we've used Newtonian mechanics uh everywhere,
Hmm.
and they worked fine.
Yeah.
It's just that Einstein's theory of relativity has shown us that Newtonian mechanics are a simplification as well for velocities that are way below the speed of light. Because like when velocities approach the speed of light, something weird happens where their energy increases by a lot, and that's why at some point like you can't reach the speed of light because you would literally need infinite energy to do that for any object that has mass. Only light, which and light has no mass. Massless objects are the only things that can reach the speed of light, and light is an example for that. But everything that has mass needs infinite amount of energy, and that's something that Einstein has found out. So they need infinite amount of energy to reach the speed of light. But as I said, like that's something that does not apply to velocities that are very slow, like compared to the speed of light, like cars or airplanes or so. And for these velocities, Newtonian mechanics was completely enough. Even though Newtonian mechanics are a simplification. So when talking about teaching simplifications or learning about simplifications, like you always have to keep in mind uh, under which conditions, on which scale this model or this theory works. I think that's kind of the answer to our the
Yeah.
question of our listener.
Exactly, because I can segue this into the potential pitfalls then of what we have, and that's what you're talking about there too. That transition to complexity as well. You know, as educators, as you know, older people trying to lead the younger generation, we also must then inform them not only that we are learning on a continuum, but ensure also that they are always the ones with the knowledge have to be the ones who are then also appropriately dispensing more complexity to the issue so that the student then can absorb and move on to more complex explanations. So that's true. That's another thing too, is that there's that relationship between the student and educator, that they also must allow them to grow. The student must learn that they're on a continuum and that they will absorb information that is level to their to their brain and the complexity that they can understand. But then it's up to the teacher also then to dispense more knowledge and more complex and more information that maybe complicates or adds more complexity to it, so that they can get to this eventual reality, which then is now you are caught up with. This is what current theory is, for example, for Albert Einstein's
Theory
relativity,
of
for
relativity.
example.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you don't start there. I think the other thing is, of course, it needs to be simple. Simple is beneficial, but to encourage also, the young person to seek out more information and find these answers, learn critical thinking too. That okay, well, if I'm told that this is this, then next thing must mean this, and then test those theories. Find out the answer to it.
That's
And
that's that's one reason, one of many reasons why teacher, like the job of a teacher, is like incredibly important in
yeah,
society. Because like they as you said, like when a teacher notices that a student gets the oversimplification and is ready for the next step,
yeah,
it's really important to actually go the next step, for the teacher to actually guide the student to the next step for the student's development.
yeah.
Uh, uh,
And well,
Otherwise, oh sorry, yeah.
sorry, continue.
Otherwise, um, there would be a lot of potential lost. There's, for example, a famous mathematician. His name is Gauss,
Yes.
and when 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 he was, I don't know, if in elementary school, his teacher gave the class the task of adding all natural numbers up to 100. Okay, so 1 plus 2 plus 3 and so on up until the
Hmm.
100. Okay, just to like occupy the students. Okay, for the teacher to chill or so. Um, and usually this takes a long time. But Gauss was finished after 5 minutes or so, because he literally invented a formula to crack that code. And that teacher recognized it. And he said after that, like, this kid has to go into higher education, because he doesn't belong in this elementary school. Like, it would be wasted potential. And this was a really good decision to like not waste the kid's time. Like, which there are many stories of like gifted kids that are really smart, but in class they are like really bored, and
Hmm.
then they do stupid stuff. And again, that's like wasted potential. And a teacher basically like guiding the student. It If a teacher can not only guide the student to a path of higher education, but the other direction is very helpful as well. If a student is overwhelmed, like, I think it doesn't make sense
Yeah.
to like keep 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 going on this path. But like, if the teacher has the responsibility to tell the student, like, actually like slow down and get back to the basics and learn that properly first. And I think this shouldn't be shamed or so if someone has to slow down, because like no one benefits from no one benefits from it if a student just tries to keep pushing.
Right. The student doesn't. The society does not. The future employers do not.
Yeah,
Yeah. Pick a scenario where there's beneficial for it. No, exactly. you wanna encourage. You wanna make sure that it engages and it's of interest. And so as a teacher, you might maybe say then, okay, well, how do I know if if I should be pushing my student towards more complex things? And I would say you will listen to your student and you will hear what they're saying to you. If they're asking questions that are rudimentary or things that you've already covered, maybe then you need to rephrase it again. But if they're asking questions like, well, you hear things like light bulb moments, or you hear things like, so does that mean that any of these kind of questions usually means they're ready for the next one. And I think the last thing I want to say about it too is the letting them know that you're being transparent with them, letting them know that this is like the starting point, this is the basics. So tell them what stage they're in knowledge, so they can understand. Okay, well, my teacher, my professor says this is a basic understanding of how sunlight rays maybe work, or you've been given what we would consider kind of a medium, or you have a high understanding. Encourage a student if they understand things. They would say you might tell them you have a really high understanding of this concept for or give them an understanding of where they are, so that it's all relative and they know, and encourage them.
Yeah, and that kind of encouragement or that kind of compliment, like you really understand this complex stuff, or like you're ready for the next step, which is basically also a compliment, uh, affects their mental health really well. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's really good.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing about mental health, like what does it do to a child if like they only get bad grades, like only get
Yeah,
D's or only get F's or so?
I can tell you from personal experience.
Tell us more. How
I
was
mean,
it?
yeah, it feels awful. You feel like the whole society tells you you're not smart. I still deal with it today, to this age, because I went through my formative years in school in 2 different countries, and I did not have good grades ever. And I thought I was really stupid, and because every test taking I did, every measure that I knew said so, right? So of course it must be. So you get it confirmed over and over and over again. It wasn't until I got to university where I realized, and I studied topics that were really interesting to me. Where I realized, oh my god, this whole time I was never stupid. This whole time I actually no, I just didn't interest me, and I felt like I was just not invested in my learning. I didn't care. I questioned authority. I became the opposite of what you would say a good student is. But then once everything switched in university, so yeah, I know what that feels like all too well.
Yeah, and like you're a good example of it. And like bad grades, but in the end you managed to graduate college. You managed to um earn earn a lot of money, like make good money. Like what there's probably a lot more people that kind of feel that way, that can relate to you. But
Yeah,
for some people, like it maybe it hit them really hard, and like they never managed to do college. They never managed to graduate from college, and I know they might be flipping burgers at McDonald's right now, never
yeah.
really realizing their potential.
100%, 100%. And in fact, you know what, those people right now, the ones who are listening to this, who are in those, if you're listening to this and you are flipping burgers, or you feel like you are in some kind of like that, what you're telling yourself right now is that you're lazy. That's not the case. You're not lazy. It's just difficult to find something that motivates when you can see through it all. It's really hard to then get off the ground, because why? You know.
What did you study in college?
I graduated college and I graduated university. In college, I studied just general kind of courses for my associate's degree. So it was just regular, typical things that are required for any typical United States university degree for an associate's, which is just common core courses. And then I went to university and I studied international relations and political science. And there I took a lot of social science courses, so a lot of stateship and speech and um, these kinds of things. A lot of laws, a lot of international relations, a lot of psychology, and of course sociology.
In your first part, did you need mathematics or so?
Yes, yeah, of course. In fact, because I thought I was stupid, I did not enroll into university until I was way later in my years. I enrolled in the school. Oh my gosh, I couldn't tell you, but it took me 5 years to get a 4-year degree because I didn't study full time. I went to work and I paid for my courses. Um, but yeah, I had to take statistics for my political science degree, and I have failed every math course just about that I've ever taken in my entire life. I've always been one of those people who were quite good at languages. I can grasp languages easy, but as good as I am at that side of the brain, I lack of in math. I have not been able to know or understand math since I was like a kid. It's very, very difficult for me, and I knew that I had to take several math classes for this degree to graduate. You just had to, and I said I met one of my professors, and I asked him. He was one of my professors for law also, but he taught math, and I said, "Who has failed your class the most amount of times and then passed it?" And he said, "Well, I had one lady, young lady. She broke my record." And I said, he said, "I think she took it. It was either 5 times and passed it on the 6th, or it was 6 times and she passed on the 7th." And I told him, I said, "Okay." I said, "I will try to beat her record. I will try to graduate and take in the class less than that. You're either going to fail me out and tell me, that I cannot take on more debt, for example, to, or you cannot stay in school for this long." But I was like, you're gonna either fail me or I'm going to take that many tries. Because if someone else can do it, I can at least push myself to go through that kind of a hell. It's not the hard work I'm afraid of. It's that I thought I physically were unable to learn the math required. But I was not afraid of the hard work. So I said, okay, well, I can fail 6 times and pass on the 7th. All I have to do is beat this girl. And I failed it. I failed statistics. In fact, I had to take remedial math, which means I had to take a math to qualify to take the math that I was then thinking I was going to fail. And I failed the remedial math also. So that is an unaccredited class that I'm paying for. But it's required for me to take so that I can get into a regular university class. So you see, the math is under all criticism when it comes to me. And I failed the remedial math, passed it. Then I got to the statistics eventually, failed that, and then I passed it on the second time. And that was the only thing that I knew was going to stay in my way. So after that, I knew I was going to graduate with my bachelor's degree, and I did.
How did it feel like when you finally managed to pass that class?
Unbelievable. I cried because I had lots of I had like, I don't know, another year, because I knew that this math was going to stand in my way. So I wanted to tackle it right off enrolling school. I'm like, we're going to have to take, it's just going to be math class every semester, some math class, because I'm going to fail them. So I'm going to have to keep taking them, which means, so I enrolled with this mindset. So you can imagine when my third year, I had passed it. I had one more year, of worth of schooling, but there was no more math. It was all done. So the amount of relief knowing that I can read, and actually that last year was really difficult. I ended up reading on average. I remember calculating the pages together from my various books that I had open, and I remember reading between 800 and 1,200 pages a week of law and international relations law, maritime law, things like that. I was reading 800 to 1,200 pages the last several weeks, before my final testing and in my final year. So that last year was actually really difficult, but not as difficult as the math.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I graduated as a 27-year-old with no financial income, paid for myself to put through. So I worked full time and I went to school full time also for the final two. For some of those years, the former two rather, not the final, the former two. So yeah,
Yeah, you should
difficult.
be proud of yourself.
I am. I'm very. Yeah, I felt amazing. I'm very. It's one of my. It's by far. It's probably my number one achievement I've ever done in my life, and all it is a bachelor's degree.
No, like I think like everyone should basically judge for themselves and like not compare with others, because
Of
like for
course.
you that course, math class, that was the biggest challenge in your life basically. And like in your mind, you said it, like you basically knew like if you can do that, and everything else is easy, or not easy, but definitely doable.
Yeah, everything else can be outworked. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a really impressive mindset. Like you knew what to focus on. You knew what the main problem was.
Yeah. Yeah, that's lucky. That's lucky that that is critical thinking. That is, you're weighing things. So yeah, lucky because I didn't come from parents who ever went and told me, "Hey, we expect you to become a lawyer or a doctor or anything like that, a dentist." Nothing like that. Those expectations were not. My parents were not super highly educated themselves. Didn't highly benefit from their education even. So it wasn't something that was encouraged in my family. But on the other hand, it wasn't discouraged either. Always encouraged to do whatever you thought you should do in life. So, but just the coming from that type of a background, mixed with the age, mixed with being an immigrant, mixed with learning in a foreign language, all these complicated things, and age and all these other things, does make it a very statistical anomaly. So yeah, very proud of it. It's always nice when you have a very low percentage of achieving something and you manage to do it. It doesn't matter what we're talking about. In my particular case, it was my degree. So yeah, it is a bachelor's degree. There are a lot of people who have much higher, of course, degrees. A bachelor's is maybe not impressive to most people, but for where I come from and the statistical odds to beat to get this bachelor's degree, it becomes then, of course, all the more valuable for me.
Yeah, that's that's a very valuable story for us to share here on this podcast.
I can say
And
this much: I would never have made this podcast if I didn't go to university, for example. And that's true I can name like 10 different reasons why that's true. But just all the way from, I didn't think I was smart until I went to university and I started getting good grades and I got approved. I graduated with honors. I am in the biggest honor society in the world called Phi Theta Kappa. I run actually the subreddit for it. I'm the moderator and creator of that subreddit. So uh, knowing that I like knowledge, learning that I like learning how to learn, all these things happened to me in university. So for me, the university degree could have never been more important. I learned so much about myself. I learned critical thinking. I learned how to discern good data from bad data. I learned that these things are not commonly known. It's why this podcast exists in the first place, right? That in our prior episode that we just recorded before this one, we were talking about logical fallacies and how these are things that are not introduced in high school or younger. So that means most people are not introduced to these fallacies, and everyone should know these things. And imagine how many topics that are gate kept or locked behind university degrees for, pick every topic. So in the future, who knows? Maybe we have a podcast guests that come from these various systems and various backgrounds that can tell people who are listening about them and their experience. How incredibly important it would be to get that information out to the general public for free in a podcast like this.
yeah, I actually came up with a name for that. Like
Tell me.
I personally call it local podcast.
Aha.
Because like I bet there are local stories in the sense of like could be your neighbor, that guy that is flipping burgers for you, um, some random person that you meet on the bus stop every day or so, like people in your local town or village that have amazing, incredibly impressive stories that are very, very valuable that are just not heard. So yeah, that's what I call a local podcast, and I would love for like people to interview these people. And for this episode, I'm interviewing you, You're not a local, but like, you you're local in league to me. Yeah, so that's why I'm asking you the question: what are life lessons that you have learned and that you would give your younger self?
Deep question. Ah, man. So if I get to teleport back in time, I meet myself, like the
Yeah.
Adams Project, you're saying. And if you haven't seen that movie, it's a funny one with Ryan Reynolds, the Adams Project. And you're saying I can come back and tell myself some valuable things that I've learned as an older person.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh man, I would tell myself that you are not depressed or lazy. You are a person who suffer from depression. That's separate. You have to separate those two. And because of depression, that laziness is going to make you think that you are inept and unintelligent, and your school's grades are going to be things that you're going to use as proof of this, and you're going to believe this for 25 plus years. I would say don't. Once you're older and wiser, I'm not older and wiser, by the way, but I know better than my younger self. I would say,
Which means you're older and wiser.
yeah, I would say this is an incorrect way of looking at it. Education is one way of looking at intelligence, but there are many ways of measuring intelligence. And for some people, many people that I have met since in university that I would have looked up to or would have thought were quite intelligent, I realize were what I consider book smart, but quite bad at applying it, meaning they're not very street smart. Which then, if that's the case, if you have knowledge that is in a vacuum, that is not very ideal. You want to be. I would much rather you have less knowledge, for example, but then know how to disseminate or apply it. So this is what you do. That's what I would tell myself. Learn how to disseminate and discern what is good data, bad data. Use and learn what critical thinking is. You are more than capable, and just continue being curious. That's what would be my advice, something like that.
This could be put in a syllabus for an education system.
It would. And would you imagine that someone like me, perhaps, have been thinking quite a bit about how to set up an education system? If I were to write a book, I've been saying to you before many times, but maybe I will say this on the podcast, that there is a reason why we're also recording this podcast, and that is I have a thinking of how you would write. I would want to write a book and flesh out those ideas on this podcast. And my book would be about how you would make a new system, a new government, a new country if you were to start with today, so 2024 as of recording. So modern day tools and how you would apply them and how you would figure out laws and education and things like that. So education and political system and governments and statesmanship and all these things I've thought quite a bit about. Admittedly, I am always changing my opinion and stance as I learn more data and I talk to more people. And so I think the podcast, maybe this book that I'm thinking that I constantly kind of write in my head a little bit, maybe this could be put down in the podcast and we can come up with a good answer. Listeners, you and myself, we can come up with together how to further the conversation on these topics. So education system is one that I would love to break down just a tiny bit today, and how I think a good education system looks and how I would do it if we were to start from anew today.
Yeah, like you mentioned a couple of very big topics like foreign policies and building a whole nation from with today's tools. That's not an easy task.
No.
So today we will start with the education system, and on the next episodes we will go further into other topics.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
Cool.
what makes a good education system?
To me, I think we have good education systems in the world right now. We know how we learn. So it's important to remember that we know this. We have the answers. And we've done science on how people learn and how to kind of shorten that path to learning. So there is data to learn about how to, to do this. But what you'll find is there are archaic systems in place that we call our public education system in various countries as of today, and they are not updated or modernized or even relevant in many, many, many different ways. So if you were to make an education system from the ground up, I think it would look quite different from the traditional education system that we have today. So, uh,
do you have more specific thoughts on that?
yeah. For example, if we go with the most general premise and idea, I think we've all have said something like, why do I need to learn algebra? Why is there a letter in my math? And how does it apply to me? Why do I have to learn this crap? If you are not super into math as a hobby, or you think math was fun in school, I can think many of you guys would relate to that query. Why should I learn complicated math? I will never use this in my life. I don't care, and it's useless. And or the second thing is, I have a calculator to do that anyway for me. And now the younger kids, I'm sure, are saying, why would I need to do this? I have AI anyway. Why would I ever need to do how to do it when AI can solve it for me? All I need is the answer at the end of the day anyway, right? And there's a good argument for it in many ways. Why, if you think about your youth, 1 to 18, or however, maybe in the future we stay in school, maybe even longer. It seems like we're heading in that direction. How come we're not taking those very few years and maximize instead what would be useful for each one of these individuals to learn to survive in society? So, for example, in my opinion, algebra is probably very good for, very important for a handful, not a handful of people, but a handful of industries is what I was going to say, that maybe uses algebra every single day. But for those, if you're in one of those industries, I'm joking, by the way. You're very important. It's very valuable. It's good that we learn them. But I would instead teach, for example, maybe we should teach how a credit card works and compound interest and what it's like to pay interest on, or maybe even making payments on interest and versus principal. If you're very confused about the words I just used, and it's not because English, but rather that those questions were not something you've been introduced to before, please Google those things, because it's really important to know what is the difference between a credit card that compounds your bill and statement every single day compared to something where you have a compounded interest maybe once a yearly or maybe quarterly. If you look at what exponential power that has, as a human, we are bad at understanding psychologically what that exponential curve looks like until you start comparing linear math compared to compound or exponential math. So, for example, that would be just one simple thing that I would teach, because humans are not good at grasping these kinds of ideas. So these things would be really important to then teach and spend more time on, instead of perhaps algebra. Maybe algebra is something you teach, but maybe you move past it quite quickly to make sure that you're trying to maximize teaching then instead things that are more important. In the past, it would have been how to run a checkbook, how to balance a checkbook. Maybe that's not useful, but you understand the idea here, that applicable math, where students like myself, who maybe were not very motivated because it wasn't applicable, maybe if it was, and we learned how, if you can save your allowance every week and somehow do X, Y, or Z with it, maybe you can min-max how much candy you get out of it. And you can teach that to a child very early so they can figure out that there's critical thinking, there's consequences, this, that, and the other. So I would focus on making sure that the education system is current and relevant to skills on how to survive the world in the context that you're in the year that you're in.
This sounds way more, I'd say, useful or practical, because as you gave the example of calculating how much more candy you can get with compound interest or so. That's something that kids will very much relate to. So your education system would kind of focus more on practical examples, everyday examples, stuff that's actually useful, right?
Yeah, I think my second point is, well, it ties in with the first one, which is you get a much more individual, contextual, kind of learning that way that is good for the individual, so that individual may save. I think you'll find in this quote unquote book that I'm writing that I'm going to be very pro decentralization in a lot of these things, and this is education's one of the decentralization things that I think some of the benefit could be made there. And currently, right now, there's a very strict structure. We get up at an ungodly hour to sit in a classroom before we've woken up to learn things we don't care about and to pass tests that we're never going to be needing to remember that information for in the future, which means it is not applicable to when you get into the workforce because it's never remembered in the first place, right? If you agree with that statement and you realize that is a true statement, you realize, what are we doing here? What the hell? We're kidding ourselves. This is ridiculous, right? So in my education, it would be much less strict, much less structure, and more individualized to the individual. No more sitting in like classrooms at an ungodly hour, unless that's what you want to learn. I, for myself, my example, I learn most late at night. I've always been that way. Some people say, that's not true. It's better for your, circadian rhythm and your learning and your hippocampus to remember things if you did it early in the day or whatever, blah, blah, blah. I understand, but it isn't where my productive hours are. So for me, I just didn't fit into a strict structure. And I think many people feel that they don't fit into that structure one way or another. Mine is, a complaint on when we go and sit in the structure together. But maybe other people feel like they don't fit into the structure based on the way the testing is done, for example, maybe, or they feel like they don't learn that particular way. So how they're being tested isn't really to their benefit. It's to the benefit of people who learn a particular way, for example. So, you can fit this however you want, and take it and run with it. But to me, the future has to be less structured. And another example of this, for example, is, in many countries now, we're going more and more towards these national tests, and these schools, depending on your country, gets funding and tax dollars based on how your school's children and pupils actually get evaluated and how well they test on these national scores. Okay, and that's really, really, really the opposite of what I would say is good for the individual. That's good for the school. That's good for the system because it's measurable, and I understand how they ended up there. But that's not good for the student and the pupil. And a school should be centered around there. So if you have motivations that are not towards that, you have messed up and your structure is incorrect, and you need to change how the system looks so that the motivation is now back towards how does a student then learn and min-max the most that they can get out of their education system so that they become a high income and a high valuable person to your country. That's what your goal should be. It should not be what it is today, is min-maxing how many students take this national test so that they can pass, because then everybody crams for this test. The test is everything that these schools focus on. They sacrifice other coursework to give more of these prep classes for these national tests, because again, that's how you've now set up the motivation so that the school gets funding that way. And funding is always something that's missing a lot out of the education system. So you have messed up the motivation, which means you've messed up the structure, which means the student and the pupil suffers. So that needs to be fixed, for example.
Wow, I feel like you have addressed a very important problem in the current education system.
Mm-hmm.
So, how would you decentralize education?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, for one, you would change how you measure, you would change how you gather data. You would have to change just about everything, really, right? I think now we're into this wild, wild west of how you would restructure the entire education system, because, yeah, it can't be measured that everybody fits into this one system of your student has the same test as this other school, and your students learned it better, that just means that they've learned how to cram for a particular test very well, and there was enough resources to make the students, get that test done very well. But that's not equal to even relevant learning for the world, right? So I would individualize. I would love to have much more funding into schools. We can, and of course that's a huge topic in of itself. But how to get a, so you have, in my old school when I was younger, you would have 3 teachers per classroom, and a classroom was about 25 to 35 students, depending on, okay? And you would have 3 teachers in there. So you have a main teacher at the front who is doing the main structure courses. Then you have 2 other teachers. They're not assistants, they're teachers, fully fledged. And each one can separate and stand in the front if they want to. But generally, you have one person who leads the morning in the front. And then you have 2 teachers who are then walking around and just helping the other students grasp the material that's going through and being done in the front. That way, you don't have any students who fall behind and fall between the cracks. And this is extremely important. And because there's no funding in schools anymore, many times you don't even barely get the one in the front, right? You almost even less 2 more teachers, right? Because in the structure that it's done right now, if you had 3 teachers, you would put them in, to min max, you'd put them in 3 different classrooms. But from the point of making sure that your pupils learn the material and no one falls behind, you can't do that. That's not efficient. You're missing out a lot there.
Yeah, so like 3 teachers in one classroom. This
Yeah.
sounds like a story of like good on paper, but in practice, as you said, like the funding is missing.
Yeah.
When we're talking about decentralized education, I was kind of thinking of all the YouTube tutorials that are out there. Centralized education would kind of be like the teacher that is the only source, the center of the education, basically, that is teaching you the topic. But on YouTube, there's like a bazillion tutorials on all kinds of topics. So in that sense, that's decentralized. Like you don't, you not only your teacher, your classroom teacher can teach you, but all these other teachers from YouTube tutorials can teach you as well.
Yeah. And I think
So
having multiple learning systems is really important
Yeah.
as well. Because the other thing about that is you have to learn as a student very early how you learn. You can be people who you can fit into various categories. You can be a person who learns only really by doing. You can be a person who learns only by holding and manipulating it with your hands. Or maybe you're a visual learner. Or maybe you are a conceptual learning that you need. Or maybe you are what we use a lot on this podcast. Maybe you need case examples and you need a demonstration of the concept so that you can apply it. So there are a lot of these different ways, and I think that would be really, really important also to have that. And just a little side thing when you're talking about this, how do I, how does it work in my personal life now? And I think the answer is my individual decentralized learner now is AI, right? My AI is individually tailored to me with my prompts. It knows what kind of answers I want, and it knows exactly, and it sits and waits for me to give my queries. It's not, a resource that is then talking to other other pupils like in a classroom setting, but rather I can have access to any kind of answers immediately in my pocket. So, in the future, maybe that's how your decentralized education is. You have access to an AI assistant that is always going to, help you for your particular case problem that you have. That's probably how it looks.
Yeah, that's actually what is being developed right now.
I
There's
bet.
like a there's a website called Khan Academy,
Uh-huh.
and
I know it. Yeah.
yeah, especially people that go into that need physics and science stuff go there to learn. But it's not only for science, but probably for many other things as well. But they've actually started to develop their own AI for teaching,
Yeah.
as you said.
There you
So
go.
yeah, that's the future.
There you go. I knew it. If I can think it, then someone's already thought it. That's always the case. So there you go. You you've demonstrated. So I think that's going to be what's common in the future in quote unquote classroom education settings will be that you're given tools like AI to help discern what's good data, bad data, and faster, exponentially faster increase your learning. I think that'll be one way of doing it.
Yeah, we earlier we've talked about like free teachers in one classroom. Sounds good on paper, but
Yeah,
in
difficult to
practice it's
do. Yeah,
difficult to do. But
costly.
with an AI assistant, like
Yeah,
maybe you don't need three different teachers, but only one or two plus an AI assistant.
yeah,
That would be really, really helpful.
yeah,
Like I bet a lot of questions that students come up with during class like might be answered by an AI,
yeah,
and then you don't need another teacher. And I feel like we have a teacher crisis worldwide where there's not enough teachers.
yeah. We
So
do.
using AI to help out the shortage, combat with the shortage would be really good.
Yeah, it's just a matter of using the AI correctly because you're right. If you have, for example, then one teacher, all of these AI tools, are always better when they are in conjunction with humans. People always seem to say, "Oh, I can't, wait till AI takes over." That's not. It's never been that way. Every single tool we've always created, humans have. It's always been in better when you add humans to it. We always need that human kind of part. So it's not going to happen that one day we come up with a new technology where it gets good, where something is then better by not having us included. That's just not how it works. So if we think about this in the future, then maybe instead of having three teachers who disseminate knowledge, just like you're pointing out, an AI would disseminate that knowledge better because it will come with links that you can just click on with one button, or click on that little link and then you can learn, and go down the rabbit hole as deep as you want, for example. Whereas with a teacher, that's not going to be the case. If you ask her why, and then she answers, and then you ask her why, and then she answers, eventually she's going to stop answering you why. But in AI, it's available to you tailored, as long as you want. So maybe how we do it is just looks different. Instead of having three teachers who are teaching the material in the front, since that's not efficient, maybe you just go back to then having one teacher in the front, but this is no longer a teacher, but maybe this is oh god, I don't want to say a prompt engineer. That's not what I mean, but someone who guides you so that you know which questions you should be asking and guiding you on what answers when you're on the right path and things like that. That is much less costly to time to the human because they can walk then between the 25 or 35 individual phone users who have iPad on there, or excuse me, who have a chat GPT on there, for example. And then they can take a couple seconds just to then, hey, no, that question is wrong. It's leading you down the wrong path. Formulate the question this way instead, or think about it, think about your problem and view it from this angle instead. Because an AI, it is like you point out so often, it is an extremely powerful. It's like a Ferrari, but like you say, the Ferrari, it's great if you're driving in the right direction, then it's great to have this huge engine, all this capital that's been poured into AI, making us super fast at learning. But if that Ferrari is heading down the wrong direction, it's actually worse that you've been giving this really big engine. It would have actually been better if you had a smaller engine or so, because then by the time you realize that you have to make that U-turn and go back, you're not so far down the line. So maybe the teacher's job then is to make sure that you're using this tool responsibly and correctly, uh, and that's how education looks in the future.
Yeah, that's something that you talked about earlier, like book smart versus street smart. Like AI is probably way better at being book smart because like it can it can read the whole internet,
Yeah.
and humans are better at being street smart, I guess. So AI would basically like take on the task of being book smart for the teacher, and obviously the teacher also has to know his stuff, but the teacher can focus more on being street smart. Another thing that you mentioned earlier is like you started saying like iPads for each student, But when you mentioned ChatGPT, and I realized like ChatGPT can be used on the phone.
Yeah.
So actually,
It
the schools don't need that much funding. Like not
Yeah.
every class needs a bunch of iPads,
No.
but
Right.
students can just use their phone. So
Yeah.
like literally no funding needed.
Yeah, and if it needs to be redone, really, it's just a matter of a license code. I mean, we already do this with Office, for example, right? They can package something. So if there needs to be in the future some kind of AI education system thing or whatever, it could still just be a code or a subscription that is, done. So it's not a physical material that needs to be printed, etc. So that can always be cheaply kind of done
Deeply and
that way.
quickly implemented.
Yep. Yeah, and adjusted exactly. Yeah.
So when we or anyone comes up with ideas like that about education system, it's the more I think about it, the more I hear about it, the more I think like it's actually possible to do a lot of change in the next few years.
Mm-hmm. I think the problem is today we've made good test takers. We've created a system where a test always looks the same. I don't care if it's multiple choice or not. A test still looks the same. What I'm meaning is that you don't create a sample and then you produce it like maybe you do in engineering, or maybe or in coding, same thing. You show your sample work and you show, look, these are projects I've done, and you show your work, and that shows that what you've done is applicable. Look, I can demonstrate this is what I've created. Excuse me. But in today, we have made many good test takers who are, book smart and not street smart. They don't know how to necessarily apply it or survive in the regular world. So my education would be in that instead of making people really good at taking tests, I would instead teach them how to disseminate and learn what is good data from bad data. We have, for example, right now, more access to more data than we've ever had in the history of time. And so you would think that that would solve a lot of people's issues, right? Data is always what we've been starving on, and finally, in the history of time, we have now more data that we know what to do with. And instead, I think the next step then is naturally we should be taught by the education system to learn then what is good data, what is bad data, what do we accept as a good answer, what do we consider a failure, what do we consider a success, and then put it through those parameters. If you just say is something good or bad without putting it through measurements and parameters on what you accept as good or bad data, then you can apply it to every little thing. And this leads me to, I listen to Joe Rogan, the Joe Rogan podcast. It's something that I enjoy, and there was a gentleman on there who was quite a bit conspiratorial. It doesn't really matter. I won't mention any names, but there was a comment on him. Some people, they fell really one way or another on if he's a genius or if he's kind of a conspiracy theory kind of person. And there's a gentleman whose name is Eric Weinstein. He's a mathematician. He has a PhD from Harvard in mathematical physics. He's very, very, very smart. He's been on the podcast very many times. So if you're a Joe Rogan listener, you've probably heard him before. But Eric Weinstein, he made a bit of an explanation of how I think this happens. Then in the age where we have so much information, how can we end up in these conspiracy theories and just wildness where people are so divisive? And he said this, if you allow me, may I read it?
Yeah.
He said, Eric Weinstein just explained the problem with average people having access to the internet and all the world's knowledge. Most people can take info in, but they can't prune it properly. They can't prune it properly and thus end up connecting dots in all the wrong ways. That's how you end up with flat earthers and other stupid conspiracy theorists in the 21st century. It's not for a lack of knowledge, it's because of the overwhelming amount of info being unloaded on the educated mind. I thought that was so smart. That's exactly it. Before, we have been starving for information. So back in the day, not that long ago, when I was a kid, people could just lie to each other. There was no way of knowing. They just told you lies. But then you had Google and you could fact check. But now, I think now in this age, we're not lacking information anymore. What we're having a problem is, quote unquote, misrepresentation of facts or alternative facts or misrepresentations of a facts, right? So we need to go in this 21st century, the next era that we need to do is learn how to discern good data from bad data. And because this is what happens if you don't know how to do that. You get these these people who basically cannot handle having a rocket ship worth of information at their fingertips, and they can Google or AI things a little bit too quickly without being able to know to put it in context and then prune out the stuff that is, well, factually not true, or things cannot be true. So, yeah,
That was a really good quote.
right. I thought so too. He's very clever. Works on the he's a managing director on the Peter Thiel fund, by the way. Something we've mentioned before. So yeah.
Wait a minute, but that quote was a random YouTube comment, right?
That was it was Eric Weinstein's comment on a podcast episode where one of the gentlemen who was on there was quite conspiratorial, and people were falling on the edge of, is he really smart or not? And the problem is because some people, they sound so out there, eccentric and maybe even futuristic.
Use very smart words.
Yeah, he's right. Yeah, exactly. That's one way of doing it. Yeah. So, yeah, for me, if we're back on the education system, you need to figure out then, of course, qualified and motivated teachers with continuous professional development to ensure that the newest information is always on there. Because remember, we were talking about it has to be, education is on a continuum, so that goes for the teachers as well. I'm not saying I have the answers for how to do this. I'm just saying these are the goals, because that was the question, right? What is a good education system?
Yeah.
How to do this, I think we could talk about for hours, so I'm not even going to go into it. I'm just setting up kind of what I think would be the parameters of how I would start looking at the problem, at least. So laying the groundwork, as we say, right? If I am what I'm preaching, I'm a good educator. I'm telling you now, we are on the basic stages of this education. Okay, we're laying the foundation, the framework. We talked about student-centered approach, focus on the individual needs, interests, and abilities of that student, right? The decentralized. Because I think, look, I am one of those people that we've mentioned who were failed by the system, evidently. Because if I am not as stupid as I thought, and today I will admit I think I'm smarter than maybe I thought most of my life, because I've now proven it to myself. And I've done that by demonstrating capabilities, right? That's how you get self-esteem. That's how you realize where you are. But I, to this day, am still struggling with multiplication table, for example. I moved between two cities when I was young in third grade. And the small village that I came from, that I moved from, had not gone to the multiplication table because, think about it like island time, things are a little bit slower moving as far as people and things. Then I moved to a much larger city, and they had already moved on. They've already started applying the multiplication table, so they were no longer learning it. And I, to this day, am still suffering from this. I still, to this day, have to think about the multiplication table and kind of almost say it out in my head before I get the answer. It doesn't come to me very naturally. And that's a failure of the system. I fell between the cracks. I moved between two cities, because my parents split up. And I was never taught this properly, and to this day, I still am paying the price for it. So if you had a more decentralized approach, I would be given then extra attention given to me, saying, hey, look at this. The multiplication table is what we base all of our math on and going on the future. And as an adult, you're also going to use multiplication. So guess what? There's no choice but to sit here and get through it, one way or another, because otherwise your life is going to get to be hell in your education system going forward. And guess what? It was. I fell through the cracks, and yeah, sure enough, to this day, I still think I hate math, probably more than and undeservedly so, because it became this huge mental block in my head where when you say math, I am the first person to start sighing and my brain wanders off. And,
Honestly, you're not the only one. I bet you're not the, like,
100%.
there's a large majority that feels the same way.
100%, absolutely. I bet there's lots of people just saying, thinking in their head right now as they're listening that, oh, that was me, and I bet That shouldn't have been you, okay? That's a failure of the system. That's not a failure of you, okay? Humans are different. We come different, and when you are a child, you're not responsible for that. That should be done by the people who are older and wiser, who know what children are capable of, okay? Why is it my fault that I did not grasp the multiplication table when it wasn't really introduced to me in the first place? My argument is that is not my fault. I cannot be faulted for information I was not really introduced or trained on. How could it be? And so yeah, it has to be decentralized that way. And imagine then. So what happened to me then, right? How come this happened? Well, I moved on. We couldn't hold back a whole classroom. So you just they just hope that I pick it up as I go, as I apply these multiplication. But what happened was the opposite. I fell further and further behind. I did not understand. It took me longer than everybody else to figure out any of the answers, which meant by the time the whole classroom had figured out the answers, I was still sitting thinking about them. And then so I never got to the answer. I could never be, every time the teacher asked me, oh, so what's the answer? I would say, oh, I needed more time. I got this far, but I never did get to the final answer. And they would just move on. So I just continued that way. I never did catch up, to the point where, as we said, the culmination is, can I even get to university and graduate? And I thought, no, I cannot. For many, many years, I never went to university. I finished high school, and then I went to work for many, many years, became an adult, many more years, and then eventually I went, screw it, right? What's the worst thing gonna happen? I've been through more difficult things than failing a math class. So I went in it thinking that I'll never get a university degree, and then against all odds I did. But all of that was, please, is you cannot fall between the cracks. It has to be decentralized in that sense.
Another thing you were talking
Yeah.
now was basically like circumstances outside of the education system, like problems in family, or for other people it might be health issues or so, which is also things that really affect the child's development. So, what to do about that?
Sorry, one more
How
time.
how can we support to, like, in my opinion, part of an education system should also be like recognizing that the problem is not the child or the student that we have right now, but it's circumstances around that child.
Yeah.
I know if the parents are arguing all the time, like this is
They're
really
going through a divorce.
yeah, or going through a divorce, when like this will have a negative effect on the child's mental health, and
Yeah.
obviously also will also affect the child's ability to perform in school.
No. Yeah, exactly. I think everything does. That's one tiny part. But if we demonstrate it this way, do you think that everyone has something that they're dealing with, some kind of problem? Yes or no? What do you think?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you think that is going to ever stop? Do you think that at some point in your life there's going to be a time, even for 5 minutes or 5 seconds, where you actually have zero things that you can improve, or problems, quote unquote?
No.
Right. You will always have it. Okay. So now you've demonstrated exactly, I think, what the problem is with a structure like this. So we just admitted, and I agree with you, people have mental illness, they have lacking of resources one way or another. Maybe, you're talking about one lack of resources, maybe a stable household because your parents are screaming at each other, and it's really difficult to do a math homework when your parents are trying to kill each other in the kitchen. You know what I mean? So yeah, absolutely. That's why it has to be decentralized, because if you think about it, you've made a central structure that everyone has to take a national test, but you've also just demonstrated perfectly to me, and I think to everybody listening, that literally everyone's dealing with something at some point. So literally at all times, the structure that's set up there's someone who's not fitting into it, or suffering from that structure being that way. We agree? At all times, someone is always going to suffer because of that structure. What if it was decentralized? how much higher chance do you have to catch up, maybe, or do that later or whatever, if you had that less of that structure where you could maybe then study in a couple of hours, or maybe you have your AI in your pocket and you can actually hear her talk to you, and teach you these concepts maybe in the evening when your parents have stopped talking. What if it was decentralized? That would be much, 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 much better, I think. Stop
Yeah,
putting
I get.
people through these forms and molds when literally no one actually fits in them.
And these forms and modes are basically arbitrary.
They are, right. They're made for the system. Again, that's my
Yeah.
point. They're not made for the student. They're not set up for the student. They're set up for the structure that's been made that way. That's the wrong. We need to go from the bottom and up, not up towards. It can't be top going, decisive
True.
towards bottom. It can't be that way. It's
Yeah.
backwards. Yeah. So, yeah, student self-centered approach, focus on individual needs, interests, and abilities of the student. Critical thinking and problem solving, of course, we have that already, but I would focus more on this, how to think about things critically, and case examples on it, and problem solving. Spend actual time thinking about, I'll demonstrate what I mean. Anytime you're given an option is a good thing, but it also means that you are going to have to sacrifice one, right? If an option means more options is better than less options. However, every time you're given an option, it means you have to sacrifice something. That's the good and the bad of an option. That's the good and bad of it, right? So if you are thinking about it that way, you have to make a balance of the two. And it means you have to choose which sacrifices you can live with and which ones you cannot. So, yeah, I kind of spaced out a little bit and forgot how I was going to tie it in there together. I apologize, but
That's actually one. I guess that's actually one thing you learn in engineering. Because like whatever design you want to roll with, there are trade-offs. Like you can't have everything. Like if you're building a gas car versus an electric car,
yeah,
or you're building a hybrid, like there's always trade-offs. Like if you build a gas car, obviously this will not be that good for the environment. If you're building an electric car, then like the range of the electric car might be an issue. And if you're building a hybrid, then like it's like a little bit of both, but like not like really the best. So
a compromise.
like in engineering, that's basically like also talking about trade-offs when you have like when you have to choose between one of these options, and when and engineers are very, very important. Like a lot of basically everything has been engineered, designed, like computers, like cars, planes, everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very important.
And good fields
Skills.
also to how to learn about how you discern and disseminate good data, because with engineering it's very pass or fail. In reality it either works or it doesn't, and you can take data and find out the answers to those questions. So good industries to find out how to figure out problem solving, critical thinking, weighing things against another, choosing options. If you choose an option, you cannot have both. You have to choose and sacrifice once. You have to choose which selection you can live with and which one you cannot.
I think it would be really great for education to have like building your own project, because like you learn from your mistakes.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
you're actually gathering your own data, and like reality will show if it works or not. If you're
Exactly.
coding, like it will give you an error or not the result you want. Like you will know immediately if it works or
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
You can't like talk your way out of it or so.
Yeah, and again, in a decentralized way, because it's your code and you get your error. That error does not apply to the kid next to you because maybe he's doing, So I think
Yeah.
that's exactly it, that you get applicable, useful, because if that's what education is for, is to make people capable so that we can solve issues in the real world, then it has to be applicable. It cannot be this, lifelong people, PhD people who teach things and they don't know anything about the real world because they've stayed in the education system and tenure their whole life. So they don't know anything. They don't even know. They don't know what they don't know. So we would need to figure out how to go back and redesign the education system so that it becomes applicable, so that private business can use these people to create and solve actual solutions in the world, and not just create bureaucracy and bloat because someone knows how to say the right words. And by the way, I guess I'm speaking about myself here because, I'm just a podcast hoster. So I literally am not doing anything but trying to move the conversation along. And but I'm not lifting any bricks myself. The next thing I was thinking too, a problem with the education system that we have today in many countries is the parental, you and I, we always say it takes a village to raise a child. Education comes from many different places. It comes from your peers. It comes from your, kindergarten, it comes from your parents. It comes from teachers, family, etc. And it takes a village to raise a child. They need to get good experiences from all over, right? Not just one place. It doesn't help if you have the best teacher in the world, but all of the other systems in society is not working. You're going to have a bad result anyway. And currently, parents really blame kids nowadays on failing. So it's going back to this testing thing. Back in the day, if a kid failed the school, the parents would discipline the child and they would make them fall in line, quote unquote, so that they would get good grades again. And however that looked and however they felt that was appropriate, But we'll move that conversation along. We'll skip that part. But nowadays, that's the opposite's happening. If your child fails, I know from several of my teacher friends that the parents will storm into their office and scream, "Why did you fail my child?" instead of the opposite. Why did my child fail? They said, "Why did you fail my child?" So it becomes the teacher against the parent. But in reality, that's not the best for the student and their learning. You need both the parent and the community and the teacher to agree on what needs to be done so that the student can then pass. It cannot have, just like you have two parents arguing in a household, you cannot have two different quote unquote educators, one being a parent, one being a teacher in a school system, disagree or scream at each other or not agree on what's best for the kid in their future if one is, quote unquote standing in the way of the other. They need to cooperate, and we need to go back to that so that the student and the pupil in our future benefit, so that we can go back to a community that raises a child. So this is something that's important.
It gives perspective.
Mhm.
Like there's many ways to build your life basically, and as a child, like, you have no idea who you are or who you will become, and just let yourself be inspired by the people in your village. And
Yeah.
village is, in this sense, like, very broadly just people, basically just people that have some sort of influence on you. It could also be like celebrities, or like people that you think are really awesome. I don't know, Cristiano Ronaldo or so. Just people that have a positive influence on you and can teach you stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I have 3 more points if you want to hear him on this, and then I can finally maybe close out the topic on this one. But I had just like I said, I have thought about this. These are things that I have been thinking about it. So it's interesting. I think so. I hope it's interesting for the listeners too. You want to hear the last 3 that I have?
Yeah.
Assessment for learning. So we said the standardized and national tests are not the answer. And like you pointed out, you could have things like the project-based learning or group learning, individual learning. And then you have to change the feedback systems to help the student track progress and guide the instruction based on individuals and the individual's progress. Right. So again, the decentralized but tailored then for the pupil. Currently, if a student falls behind the whole class, the whole class can't be held back, so the student falls between the cracks. and that is exactly how I still don't know the multiplication table easily and at the top of my head. The next one was, if we're going with it takes a village to raise a child. The next thing that would need to be tackled then in education is the holistic development. We have to decide as a society if our teachers should teach religion, sex, and other oral ethical guidelines, or if that should be left up to the household and the parent. We kind of have to start figuring out a little bit. Maybe there's some kind of individual approach again, where when the parent enroll the student, maybe they get some kind of quiz or something to show a little bit of, are they more a closed conservative kind of family, or are they more open? And then if they score a little bit more on the conservative side, maybe they leave it to the classical teachers should teach sex, for example, in a school setting. Whereas maybe if you're a little bit more on the open end, maybe then you would prefer that you as a parent have the bees kind of conversation with your child. And we need to figure out where that line is drawn, and emphasizing that the overall development of the students, including emotional, social, physical, and ethical growth, is vital for nurturing a well-rounded individual. And this is only done if we can figure these things out, because I know it's a divisive topic. Some people say, you leave religion out of my school. I don't want to hear it. My child should not be subjective to, woo woo, quote unquote, right? And then there's other ones who think that that absolutely you should be introduced to different religions, and you should let the child then find out more, and maybe if they're interested, then they're allowed to go into that. But maybe the teacher, maybe the teacher is maybe not the parents, because maybe they don't know that much about it. So you can really fall one way or another. I think if you feel really strongly about it, consider both sides of the argument there, because there are pros and cons to that holistic development. So I only wrote it down again as a point of what we need to consider moving forward. I'm not laying any brick here. I'm not saying how we solve it.
You said earlier on, like, becoming well-rounded, or so. What do you think? Is it better for a student to become a jack of all trades and a master of none, or become a master of something and then like don't know the other stuff?
So in general, like you do with most things in life, if you are starting a movie, you start in the general and you go to the specific. In this podcast, we go from the general to the specific. And I think life is the same way. You need the foundational blocks to be laid, and then as you further into these topics, you can become more and more specific. But in the earlier formative years of education, it should not be very specific, because it would be much better if you learn how to first take care of yourself as a human being, and then once you have those basic needs met, you can then continue on. Like in a case example of this is, if you, for example, learn all there is to know about algebra, and maybe that's super useful even in a case example, but you don't know how to cook food, for example, you're going to need to be a little bit more well-rounded, because you need some of those basic needs kind of met. And in society, we need some of those. We need to know how to talk, how to communicate. We need to know how to dress, eat, prepare, try to have some kind of household economics going, right? There are a lot of different things that you need as a basics to become at least basically well-rounded. I'm not saying you have to master all of these things, but yeah, in the beginning, you need to learn some ethics probably in school, some morals. You probably should learn some social cues, some social lines. You're gonna really suffer in a society. Maybe learn how to emotionally, figure out how to limit yourself, or maybe even EQ, or maybe even other emotional states of other people, so that you can fit better in society. So you need some type of well-roundedness, and then once you get older and more specific in your education, I would say then specify. It's good in society if we have a bunch of people who are specified outwards in all the different topics of the world. That's good. That's good for everybody.
That sounds reasonable. I think, yeah, I agree with you. With the basics, like you basically have to learn the basics so that keep you alive, like what food to eat and a little bit how to cook, household economics,
How to
and stuff like
clean.
that.
We should be taught how to clean in school. I swear to God. Do you know how
Yeah.
many partners I've had who say, "Oh yeah, I know how to vacuum, I know how to clean," but they don't. They should be taught in schools. We really should learn like this chemical is good for these things. This is how you clean this. This is how you do that. I mean, we should really be taught. I mean, the basics, useful, applicable skills. If you know how many more partners I could have stayed with longer if they knew some of the basics of how to converse with each other or how to clean an apartment or how to think about money. But no, we leave that to society to be taught by our partners. That's wrong. We should have a basics. We should be well rounded. That should already come because a relationship is complicated already as is. So we should have this basics foundation. Sorry, continue. I didn't mean to interrupt there.
Yeah, no,
I got
that was a perfect point, like that I have not thought about.
yeah, think about the strife that you have with your people in your life. Okay, I mean you, and I mean our listeners. And now imagine that if you had at least a foundation in education, so you knew at least your expectation to be coming from from the same place. Now imagine how much simpler some of those, and how much quicker you could get to conclusion. Because then you end up at the subjective. Well, I think this. Oh, okay. Well, I don't agree. I think this. Okay. Well, then that's fine, right? But if you don't have a basic understanding, and I do, for example, like, let's say you don't know how a credit card works. I had an ex who did not realize, and I'm not making this up, I'm not making fun of it either. In fact, it was quite a pain for me in my life. But I had an ex who didn't know that when a credit card bill came, that you actually had to pay it. This person was given a credit card at 17 years of age and was failed the education system by school. And my girlfriend at the time did not know that these credit cards that she had just recently opened up actually had to be paid. She thought that the sum was restarted every month. And so you can imagine then me as a person who was taught this and I know what a credit card is, I know how they work. You can imagine the incredible how very different our relationship was going to work for the next several years from that point on based on that conversation. Now imagine if she had been taught this in school and never fell into credit card debt because she knew how they worked and understood the repercussions of them. Now that's just one example of it, and it is an extreme one, but it is a good demonstration of you don't know what you don't know, and we need that well-roundedness, basic foundation to just function as basic people. If you don't know how to clean, how are you going to go out and change the world? It's a Jordan Peterson reference there. Go and clean your
Clean
room.
up your room.
But there's a point to it, right? There's a reason why he says that, and that's what it's based on. You want to be effective. You want to be able to affect change. And how do you do that? You gain experience doing those things. And how do you do that? Well, you do start essentially with cleaning up your room a little bit, like he says. It really is. Start, like Stoics say, start with where you can affect change. And that is usually in your nearest proximity. And that means your nuclear family, or if it means proximity, it might mean your room, or maybe it means your apartment. But again, that is why he says that.
Talking about Stoicism, can you go into the concentric circles of Stoicism?
Yeah, but what we could. I will give you a short version of it because I want to talk about the Stoicism and a bunch of other international relations political theories together. I think we could make like a whole episode on it. But since I hit on it, what Stoicism is, you have these concentric circles that start from yourself, okay? And these rings, think of yourself as a center, and then think about rings going outwards from you. And Stoicism in international relations theories state that in morals and ethics are best used when you have power over something. Because if you cannot enact change, then what's the point? You're just fantasizing then. We agree? So then it starts with, okay, where can you enact most change for your village or for your society, for your church, or for whatever it is that you're wanting to apply this to, starting with yourself and your influence as you are in the context of now. What does that mean? It means if you are, for example, a father, maybe you then have a wife and a child, at least one, okay? And maybe if you are the father, at least historically, maybe you were the one who were the breadwinner, and historically, maybe you were the one who set the rules for that. and you could change the rules for how your family maybe orders groceries. Maybe. That's an example. Okay. And if you do that, you have then affected your immediate family. And that then has an outward concentric ring on how that affects going outward. So you go into, you have made a decision which affected your family, which means that there's a purchasing decision that was made for you and your family, which means the economics was changed for your local area. So maybe you move out to maybe one further out, and then that area maybe then makes less money, and then therefore they were less taxed, and they were a smaller business, and then it continues moving out further and further. But for example, then, so, and that's how moral and ethics should be built, on creating a good society. That's how Stoicism is viewing it.
Okay. All right. We will go into further detail on Stoicism in another episode.
Yes, with some good case examples on what that looks like, because it's a very interesting one, and I think it is a good one that a lot of people don't know about, and maybe some of the people are going to realize that, oh my gosh, I am a stoicist, I just never had a word or a term for it. It's true. I do believe that if I make a difference here, then I make a difference with my neighbor, my community, or my church, or my sports club, or my tennis club, or whatever you're involved in. And then maybe that makes a difference somewhere even further out, where your politicians, for example, because your community gets together. So it's supposed to have a ripple effect furthering out, but starts with you and where you can affect change, because everything else is just fantasy and useless then. And then I wrote policy and vision, setting up the most of the teaching should be towards what is required and useful for society, not necessarily what education thinks it can make money for them. I'm talking about the structure there, right? A university will create a degree, quote unquote, a bachelor's degree or whatever, for anything it thinks it could make money. It doesn't necessarily mean it relates to a job out in the real world. We all know this to be way too true, right? I technically don't work in policy making, even though that's what I studied. So I'm a perfect example of this. I would say we should bring the education system back to the real world instead of these money-making schemes. Just because the people want a class and something that is fun doesn't mean that it is what people should use as kind of an elective to graduate. The way it's set up in many countries now, particularly in the States, is to get a degree, you have to choose a certain amount of electives. And these electives are usually on whatever the student thinks is fun, which is good if you want to have the student get introduced to new topics. But it is really, really bad for making a student useful in a society. If you take various classes that maybe aren't super niche, non-specific things to your degree, it's easy to get an A in that class. So your motivation is set up wrong, because you will choose that because it's fun and it's easy to get an A. And that's the viewpoint and motivation of a student who chooses that class. So that's that motivation is set up incorrectly there. I would need that to be changed in the education system, so that instead the course offering that's been offered are still things that you can always put down as a certificate or diploma, or even for your degree, that is useful then for maybe the private business, or maybe even government for that matter too. But it needs to be things that is a useful skill, that is not just for filling up an elective.
Who decides what's useful and how to determine what is useful for society?
So I knew you were going to ask that, and I think the best way of doing it is you listen to private business and what the demand is there. Whatever they're screaming for the most is how you figure out backwards from how you need to make your curriculum, make that person who goes through that curriculum best fit that job title going. So there needs to be a one-to-one connection there, working with the actual employers on what would be most useful for them. Right now, that's not what's happening. The university degrees are not listening to the private, and too many people are coming out with, like me, international relations degrees that have no use for it, because there's only so many diplomats, there's only so many government workers, there's only so many things needed. But what if we had a much better balance on teaching useful things that private said we would invest in it? Because if you look at it now, for example, I worked in several corporates, and this education has kind of been outsourced, because the private business do need you to have these skills. So what happens? You have all these EBS, you have all these kaizens where you're learning and you're sitting on these required teachings and learnings. I mean, pretty much every corporate have that. Why do you think that they are taking the time to pay for your not only your education, but usually they do it during work hours as well? So they're losing working hours as well out of you. Why do you think that they because it's very, very valuable. They need you to have these skills and they're not being taught in schools, so they have to fund and foot the bill for this. You don't think that they would be very, very motivated to give you this data so that you can create instead out of the box students who come out of these schools with these skills? And then instead of losing and the company's paying for this, it could already be done in the education system because it should have been done this way in the future, or they should have been done this already anyway. And that's not to say that there shouldn't be CE, meaning continuing education. There should be, because of our society. We learn very quickly, and data changes very quickly. So we're always going to have to continually learn anyway. It just should be on new information coming. It shouldn't be to complement information that these people should have already had going into the working force. That's what I mean.
Early on, you said like learning how to clean is important. Which company in the private sector that benefits from that?
Learning how to make learning.
Learning how to clean.
No, that's not what I mean with it. If that's how you took it, or if that's what you, then I maybe have misexplained. That's
No,
not
no,
what I
no,
mean.
no. No, what I'm trying to point out
Uh-huh.
is it's not only the private sector, it's not only businesses that decide what's useful for society to learn. Like as you said earlier on, like learning social cues as well, even when you're just a programmer working in your home office or so, is also really useful to learn and to operate in society. So what I'm trying to point out is like it's not only businesses that should be able to decide what's useful to learn for society, but the people as well. Like I know families and normal people. Not
Yep.
that families are not normal people, but yeah, I'm trying to incorporate these groups into the decision making of like what's useful to learn in society.
Hmm.
And maybe you can help me out on how to formulate this.
Yeah, but that is exactly what I'm saying, is that, yeah, it takes a village to raise a child, and that you get education and knowledge from many different sources. And there will be, some of them will be from your bosses, some of them will be from your peers in the professional workforce already anyway. But you need these individuals from the point of view from individuals coming out as a complete and best apt and fit as a person to survive in society. And if you have people who have some confidence in their skills, they have a little bit of abilities, we come out with some basic know-how, then it won't be such a weird power dynamic when you're, we all know what it's like when you're coming out into the workforce at 17, and anything the employer tells you, you just go, yes ma'am, yes sir, and you don't know any better. It's not until you have years and years of experience in the workforce where you realize sometimes they're incorrect, and you actually have to fight back a little bit to say, no, I'm not going to do this, but what I will do is this, and things like that. But you don't learn this. Why not? You should learn this in school. You should know these things. That, look, we're just trying to run a company for a profit. It's trying to solve this solution. We're trying to get there together. We're trying to figure out how to get there best, and then after that, it should be a conversation. But that's not how we come out. We come out inexperienced, with no knowledge, with no way of defending ourselves, don't know anything, and we get taken advantage of by the private sector a lot, and that's wrong. And I think if we came out with a little bit of better well-roundedness, that would be a much more equal conversation and power structure than it is right now, and that would be really important, I think, going forward. Because at the
Yeah.
end of the day, your company is competing against not only solving the problem that is set out, but it's also competing against other companies in that industry. So at the end of the day, if you all want to have jobs and make most amount of profit, you should care mostly about getting to the right answer, however that looks. And usually that looks like a conversation instead of a power dynamic. Usually the more people you have in a room, when you spitball an idea, the better solution is going to come out at the end. Because you need those people to be in the room to start at least saying the answer to you, so you can start going down the path of that. But if not, that person is not in the room to spitball that idea in the beginning, you're not going to go down that path, and then it'll be a solution that never will be introduced to the answer. So again, a conversation is always better than exclusion, I think.
Yeah, that's what we are trying to do on this podcast, having a conversation
Right.
about topics that we think are important.
Right. I've based my whole life on this, on this thinking right here. Exactly. I will die thinking, thinking this. That yeah, absolutely. This education that we're talking about now should have been discussed and made available to you, and we apologize on behalf of all society that you were failed, and so were we. You know. The last thing that I have on there, I know I went long, was emphasis on lifelong learning. It's fun to learn too. That's the other thing. I learned that as long as I care about my topics, I enjoyed the learning. So, nowadays, before when I thought I was stupid and maybe even had a problem or an inability to learn or remember things because I didn't test that well, now I do test well, and I realized that wasn't actually the problem at all. I just didn't care. It wasn't fun to learn. It wasn't applicable to me. So, and emphasis on lifelong learning, it makes our brains make and create more synapses, which means we make more bridges in our brains that then therefore exponentially increases your capacity to learn in the future. So what I'm saying is, the more you learn, the more you are able to learn. Now think about that. It's like having the pie, and then the pie also grows as you eat it. I mean, it's just the best. Learning is the funnest. So, yeah, you get more comfortable in your own skin if you don't feel like knowledge is reserved for the few. But if anyone can have information, and we can disseminate it, all we got to do is then is be curious. But yeah, it shouldn't. This knowledge shouldn't be gatekept behind expensive university degrees. Because it benefits the structure and the system to have it that way, because then you will enroll, you will pay the tuition fees. But instead, we think that the society is better off if everybody knows these things. And then from that point on, we can focus on the next problem, which will be, how to solve the actual issues once we've learned how to do this. So, yeah.
Yeah, like one of the big issues for today's or our generation is climate change. Maybe we just need more smart people. And
Sure. Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So
uh,
now you just got us canceled, because you could say more people means we have more people towards figuring out the solution, or you could say more people are more people to pollute, and therefore the world is in a worse place. We should have less people.
what do you think? I think we need more people. Like
Yeah.
I don't think overpopulation is a problem.
You don't?
No, I don't.
I think as long as we move off of this planet at some point in the future and not too distant time, I think we will be fine. Um, we don't have, for example, a food problem. We have a transportation of a food problem. As it looks like right now, this planet could still stand to have lots and lots of billion more people. It looks like, if we change some of our behavior. So, in that sense, are people, like, quote unquote, like the only real cause for why this planet is, maybe not. So we could have some more people.
Yeah,
But I think if you have more people now, you're going to exponentially create more people in the future. So ideally, I would say careful with how many more people we have. I would say just be careful how fast, because if we are not on another planet, and one day this does become where we are more people, and it just doesn't become sustainable to harvest enough food for all of us to eat, then you want to make sure that date doesn't come too soon. I think that's what I think about it.
I think having more people and running the same system that we have right now is bad.
That much we can all agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So overall, like we really need to change the system, and maybe like fertility rate is going lower in Western countries, and this will probably result in a lot of issues. And maybe people will then wake up and realize like we probably need more drastic changes in education system, and a lot more.
Mhm.
But when we fix that, I think more people is better. Because yeah, when you want to solve a problem, it's really good to have different minds together. Like different people have different ideas, and we will, with more ideas, with more thoughts, we will solve more problems. It's just like when you and I all work together. Like
Mhm.
yeah, when I'm on my own, like I will forget a lot of things, and
Yeah.
then you are there to remind me of stuff.
Yeah, the question I guess is there a critical mass? Is there an end where introducing more people is not going to generate better ideas, for example, if we use that as an example?
Yeah.
Because after that, if there is a critical mass and there is no better ideas introduced in a room because everyone's already said what they can think of, then anything past that is going to be more below to the system, which is not going to be ideal. On the other hand, maybe that's the wrong way of looking at it, because maybe instead, if you have 10,000 people in the room, now you have gotten the one guy who came up with the exceptional answer, and that answer is actually better than all the other 10,000 people's suggestion. But you need to take that big of a sample size to get that one particular one-off guy who had the one-off answer that actually particularly fit this solution, maybe.
Yeah, and imagine we have more people, and let's say like 0.1% of the people that might be an Einstein.
Uh-huh.
Imagine we have more Einsteins,
Mm-hmm.
not
Yeah.
only in physics.
Right.
One Einstein in physics, one Einstein in uh, biology, one Einstein in rocket science or so. That would be
Yeah.
really good, and progress. There will just be more progress. And
Yeah.
look at all the progress that humanity has done in the last 100 years.
Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah, every now and then we get one of these, extreme thinkers who bring our civilization forward in these massive leaps, and these people are few and far between. So in that sense, you have a good point that it does take thousands and thousands, or maybe billions of people to get X amount of these very special people, like like Einstein and Oppenheimer, and pick a thing, Michael Jackson if you want.
Yeah. And as you said earlier, there might be a food management problem, but it's not only food but other resources as well. So it's not that we will run out of resources on planet Earth. I think it's more that there's a management problem through
Mm-hmm.
corruption, through like just idiot politicians that don't know what they are doing.
Yeah.
So hopefully, this episode has inspired one or two people to go out there and make a difference. Maybe keep the stoicism in mind that has been described earlier. Start with your room, start with yourself, and go on from there. All right. Thank you guys for listening.
Thank you much. Have a good one. Until next time.
So yeah, bye bye.